Welcome to What If, So What, the podcast where we ask what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real in your business. I'm Jim Hertzfeld.
And I'm Kim Chopek.
We're part of Perficient's digital strategy team, and today we'll ask what if, so what, and most importantly, now what?
Listener, when is the last time you observed one of your customers try and navigate an experience designed expressly for them? It could be trying to find something on your brand's website, or chatting online with customer care, or even trying to track down a spec sheet. If the answer is yesterday, well, congratulations, you're ahead of most digital leaders who still prioritize the proverbial urgent over the important. But with a reported 60% of so-called customer-centric companies outperforming their competitors, why do we seem to be getting further away from our customers instead of closer to them? Today, we talk with Janelle Estes and Andy McMillian from usertesting.com about how to better operationalize customer insights and really walk the talk of customer centricity. So Janelle, Andy, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be a part of it.
Well, let's dive into the first question. Janelle, the chapter titles in your book use phrases I've been using for years, and truly it made my heart swell to see those in print. Specifically, what are you trying to answer? And you are not your customer. That is something that I say almost weekly. However, it made me feel that you've observed there's still a lot to learn and how to think about the goals and objectives of user research if these phrases keep coming up. Can you summarize what modern customer research programs should look like today in this world of proclaimed customer centricity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you're right in the sense that, these are still fundamental challenges that we see across the board. And I think the second one you mentioned, in particular, the you are not your customer. It's funny when we were putting the chapter titles together, it was like, we're trying to make it so bold and blunt because it is still such a challenge.
Yep.
I think people have a hard time imagining that their customers are different than they are. And actually, it's a human bias. Like we all actually have that perspective in some way or another. But making sure that that point was, we drove that home in the chapter title and even in the chapter itself. So certainly, making sure that that is something that's top of mind when you're putting together a customer research program, right? Making sure that you are considering perspectives that are different than your own, different than the people who are building the experience or inside, the four walls of the company. In terms of, building this sort of modern day customer research program, I actually would suggest and Andy and I kind of go back and forth on this in terms of using the word research itself. Because I think there's something about that word that actually makes it feel a little intimidating. And some often feel that they have to know research and how to do it in order to be part of the program. And I think that that's a misconception. And I think that's actually part of our jobs as we think about the future of helping teams and helping our company build this shared understanding of who our customers actually are, is making it approachable and accessible. And that was really a big focus of the book, to be honest with you. The 4 chapters that two of them, which you just referenced, it's the second part of the book. It basically, creates a very approachable framework for how to do this. And that's exactly what I see in terms of the future of these programs, is making it easy for anyone to be involved. And whether that's talking to customers on your own, or even just consuming information that was collected by somebody else, making sure that that process is easy, straightforward, approachable, accessible. That's the future of these programs, the successful ones at least.
That's a great answer, Janelle. I really think your point about research is spot on. I think it could be intimidating to people, and I think that's a great point in the future, trying to make it accessible and really driving the success of the program is to make it accessible. Related, Andy, talk a little bit about the power of opt-in feedback you reference in the book. What are the benefits of this approach to the customer and to the organization?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting transition that a lot of companies are going to go through, which is this realization that while we've digitized all these customer experiences, we've started relying, perhaps unfortunately, on tracking people in order to manage these customer experiences. And what we've seen over the past year, and I think Apple's really led the way on this, they've created an infrastructure on your iOS device to block a lot of this tracking. And we're seeing it impacting all these companies. And I think the message there isn't, how do you as a company now take on your own tracking strategy versus using one from a third party, which is sort of what Apple was blocking. But rather, how do we think about in this new digital model of doing business, creating what I would call true opt-in mechanisms for listening to customers? And what I mean by that is not an opt-in mechanism where somebody, accidentally didn't click the radio button and now they're on your email list and you get to email them all the time. What I actually mean is this crazy idea of maybe ask your customers overtly to give you feedback, to say to them, hey, we created a new mobile app. We'd like your feedback on it. Will you share your feedback on this experience? And then have the ability, and this is a lot of what we at User Testing use our technology to try and help folks do, to actually process and consume that honest, open, requested feedback and take away things that you can do to make your experience better. And I think we relate to this as consumers. If I think about the airline I fly with, I'd love to give them feedback on the app I use all the time. Or if I think about my favorite restaurant and what it looks like to use their mobile ordering experience, like if they ask me for feedback, I'd gladly share with them what I like and don't like about that app. And part of that is letting them use the app and sort of narrate their experience out loud and share their screen. And that's a big part of this strategy that we outline in the book of how to collect this kind of feedback in a digital world. And so to me, it's really this opportunity to use technology not to subversively track what all of our users are doing, but to overtly ask them for feedback. And then I think importantly, become an organization that values that feedback, to go from having just banners, in the break room that say customers come first or we love our customers, but this idea of actually valuing the relationship to a level where we actually say, no, we take the time to actually ask our customers for real feedback. We listen to that feedback. We share those stories around the organization. We have real empathy of what it's like to be our customer. And so that's what we mean by opt-in feedback. We mean literally asking people to give you feedback, having them know that they're giving feedback, know they're recording themselves, and then take the time to consume that feedback and make it part of your product or marketing experience.
It does seem basic, but revolutionary at the same time, doesn't it?
It's amazing to think how many people today probably build a product experience where they never actually get feedback from real people on that experience, maybe outside of like their network of friends. And I think we should change that.
Right. The horror story of, the boss's wife doesn't like it. We need to fix it.
Exactly. And it's funny how a small number of narratives like that become the reason to fix something versus, hey, there are a whole bunch of these narratives. We should collect them a little bit more systematically, but also listen to them, right? To actually take the feedback that we're hearing from our top flyers, from our most valued shoppers on our mobile app that want something to be different.
Right. And that's a great segue. Janelle, you talk about the importance of everyone in an organization understanding that holistic customer journey in the book. Can you break down some key processes or tactics to make that actually happen? For example, off-property experience examination. That was a great point you brought up when we were talking earlier and something that I hadn't really considered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and one of the things that I do actually see with many companies is that there is a belief that customer experience is important. It's something the company wants to or is investing in, and they recognize that it's a strategic differentiator. The challenge then becomes, how do you take that vision statement, right, and actually do something about it? And to Andy's point, beyond just the tracking and looking at customer behavior and data, there's endless amounts of that teams can be looking at. And I will never say that data is not useful, but it's just part of the picture. And without actually connecting with your customers as real human beings and understanding their needs and seeing the world through their eyes, you need that to have that holistic perspective. Now, with all that being said, you're right. And your question is like, well, how do we actually do this? So I have, a couple, I guess, best practices or tips that I think are useful to think about. One is, and kind of goes to my first point, which is making it accessible and easy for anyone to be exposed. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. And it was It was years ago. It was a fast food restaurant chain. I visited their headquarters, and I remember walking by a room and it was all glass. It was like a fishbowl, right? And there were people that were kind of sitting on bean bags, and they had 4 or 5 different monitors where they were looking at their social media feedback and people tagging them in social posts. And, they were doing all this sentiment analysis on top of the individual, comments that they were seeing. And it was like, everybody was just glued to these screens, like trying to make sense of trends and what was happening and how customers were feeling. And I remember walking by that room and being like, wouldn't it be amazing if there was like maybe a 5th or 6th screen that just shows like actual people giving you feedback about the last time they ordered from you, or even showing you their experience as they go through the drive-through or order in the mobile app. Like, we're doing so many things to bring data to life in so many different places. Why shouldn't we also be doing this with, human insight and the customer perspective, and actually seeing them as real people? So that's one tactic, is just, and I've seen some of this, I referenced that example, it was 5 years ago. The industry has made progress. I have seen this type of, work done. We have one customer, HelloFresh. They actually have a monthly insights party that they host, where they take everything that they learn and that's interesting about their customers across all the different teams that are engaging with them, and start sharing that out and socializing it and creating a more consumable way for people to be able to, hey, sit down for 20 minutes and learn all of the interesting things that we learned about in the last month. And then you apply that to your work. Or maybe you have more questions now that we can potentially explore.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's sort of one angle, right? Is like making it accessible and socializing it, right? And having it be in the places where people already are. The other angle of this is finding ways to build it into your process. So we all, as either product teams or marketing organizations, or even, customer support organizations, right? We have workflows and operations and processes that we follow, and thinking about placing customer feedback from real people into those processes is another great tactic to think about how to operationalize this. And I would say that the last thing you want to do is try to add in 10 different places where you're going to get customer feedback, starting with boiling the ocean, right? That's probably, nirvana, ideal state, but start small. Find one place in your process where it's critical for you to get customer feedback. Start doing it. Start building it in. Start getting the team to build their muscle around it. Start gathering information that actually guides the team and helps make an impact on your decision-making processes. And there's so many great places to build this feedback in, and finding what works for you and your team is another sort of best practice I would share with listeners.
That's great. And I think it sounds simple, ends up being complicated. Exactly to your point. We've seen it as well, boiling the ocean. There are 10 places we could ask. So let's ask in 10 places. And then we're back at the analysis paralysis stage. So I think that's such an important tip, to start small. Is there one point in the journey that you've found is more ideal to start, or you get the biggest bang for your buck, for example?
I love this question. It's like one of my favorite questions. So you typically see when people are just starting out with doing this, they tend to look at existing experiences, that are already out there, that are live, or maybe they're looking and gathering feedback on a prototype or a concept or an idea or something like that. They tend to start there because it's super actionable. Like, you get the feedback, you recognize and can identify the problem, and then you can start thinking about, how do we fix this? The challenge with that is sometimes you're fixing something that isn't valuable or useful to begin with. And I do believe it is important to do this work at that phase. And like I said, it's often where people start because it is so actionable, but truly the value comes much further up in your process when you're actually just trying to understand, like, what problem should we be solving? Or what are our customers' worlds like? Like, where do we fit in, or where could we fit into their world? So much earlier in the process, when you're really just understanding the problem space or trying to figure out, what's the right solution to bring to market, or should we even try solving this problem? The challenge is that area, that part of the process is so squishy and uncomfortable. And the feedback that you get can be quite diverse and hard to make sense of. But that is where I believe the true value of this work shines, when you're able to pull it in much earlier in the process.
That's great. As you were talking, I literally looked up and praised the heavens with what you were saying. This is great advice. The problem, I think, the flip side, and Andy, maybe I'm looking for a hot take. Maybe the hot take just doesn't exist still, but what do you do with this data? We've talked with so many of our guests about the challenges of convincing internal stakeholders that customers are experiencing pain points in that holistic journey, showing data, showing videos, showing experiences. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, they're still just kind of, biased to a single voice. What methods have you found successful in getting the organization to actually believe research findings?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's one of the big opportunities for companies to have real impact. One of the things, maybe if we take like a half a step back, we help create something we call a customer experience narrative, which is the ability to kind of connect with anyone, use their screen, their mobile phone, whatever it might be, to capture a specific set of information. So they're guided through a set of tasks you want them to do. So you're not randomly watching somebody just, wander around your website aimlessly or something. They're recording their screen, they're narrating their thoughts out loud, and ultimately you're trying to get to an endpoint. So you might say, I want you to go to my website and shop for an umbrella. And you're watching, 10 or 15 people do that using our technology or similar technology. And so you're actually saying we wanted people to do something and something else happened or something didn't go well. And so part of it is having some structure around how you're collecting this. And then part of it is having these customer experience narratives being a powerful deep dive into what it's like to be a customer and try to accomplish something. And so ultimately what we see folks have the most success in driving change and urgency around an organization is being able to marry, something happening in the data. Hey, we're not seeing the kind of conversion we want. Customers aren't happy with this part of the experience. There's something that you're able to articulate at scale, but then you're illuminating that with these narratives, right? Let me show you in a structured way. We noticed shopping cart conversion is down. So we ran some folks through that experience from some different audiences that we care about. And here's what they had to say. And it's in their words. You're seeing their screens, their perspectives. And I think that's where you build real empathy. That's where people in an organization say to themselves, that's not the experience I build. That's not what I want people to go through when they're using the thing that I built. And that's different than, hey, the NPS score went from 62 to 60. What are we all going to do? Like, that's not why people get up every day and spend time away from their loved ones, building an experience for their customers. They want their customers to have a great experience, right? They want to see and feel people have that success, or they want to see and understand that failure and go, hey, we're going to change the way that works. And so I think if you can marry the broad trend data and quantitative analysis with structured qualitative feedback from real people that sort of illuminates, again, what it's like to be a customer and why that's frustrating, that's when we see people take action. I think that's when we really see companies get aligned around making change. I've used the analogy in the past. It's a little bit like what politicians do. Politicians, they give you this massive data problem, it costs trillions of dollars to do something and it's wasteful. And nobody understands what that means. You don't relate to that. That doesn't get you excited. And then they sort of lean in and they tell you a story about a person they met when they were campaigning. And you're like, yeah, that's the thing we should go fix. Like, that's not okay. And I think that's true in business. We need the narratives to go with the data to kind of connect with the story and drive change.
I think that's great. And I think my biggest takeaway from the book was maybe more provocative. Do you really know your customer? You think you do, but do you really know them? If I'm a CEO, what's one thing I can do today to validate if I really understand what it's like to be my customer?
I would say for CEOs, it's first acknowledging that you're spending every day living and breathing the product experience that you're trying to create, and it's different for your customers. And so one of the things I think is helpful is when you think about not just a different user, but a lot of folks talk in terms of their different audiences. And so, for me, thinking about somebody who maybe doesn't have a technical background, because I was a Java developer earlier on, seeing them go through and use our product, they have a different technical expertise than I do. It's not hard for me to imagine their experience is different than mine. We've seen some interesting ones in the marketing space where people are very deliberately challenging their organization to get more diverse perspectives, maybe from underrepresented groups that they're not reaching out to today. And again, I think those are easy ones for people to go, oh yeah, they might have a different perspective than me. And so you sort of start with the more obvious ones. And then you go, wow, like they really had some feedback that was different than I might have expected, that challenged some of the assumptions that I make. And then you pretty quickly start to realize, I bet lots of people think about this differently than I do, because I spend all day at this company, that I'm running, or this I'm designing. And so I'd say you got to start with those. I think it's easier to sort of show people some perspectives that are different than to try to corner them in a room and be like, you're not, you don't understand what our customers go through. I think most people want to push back at it and say, yeah, I do. Like I work here. I spend all day with customers. And you sort of have to go, well, okay, let's look at a different subset. Let's really show some examples of some folks that are, maybe coming from a different part of the world or a different background or different technology expectation, or just behave differently than you do. And I think that can be pretty illuminating. And so I think there's sort of an initial breakthrough you're going through with that leadership team. We see this a lot with digital transformation, where, you have companies that they've done business one way for quite a long time. That used to be maybe more in person, and now it's more online. We had a chief digital officer we were working with that told us this story of one of their challenges internally is that when you say the word customer, most people that have been in the business for a long time pictured, they were a high-end retailer. They picture a wealthy couple walking into a shop like on the Champs-Élysées and buying something. And they're trying to explain, like, most of our customers aren't in that shop anymore. Like, they're online. Like, you're not even picturing the right experience. And so they're using customer experience narratives as a way to highlight internally, like, when we say customer, this is what we mean. And so I think attacking some of those core assumptions are a great way to get people to sort of broaden their perspective and sort of open their mind. And then you go, yeah, I probably don't know what it's like to be most of my customers. My customers don't work with this company.
Right.
I would say, too, it's also about modeling behavior. So in order for a CEO, to back to your question, to understand, to validate, do they really understand what it's like to be a customer? Use the experiences. I know you might not be your customer, but showing that you can engage with different parts of the business, different parts of your experience, and doing it in a way where you're learning and you're trying to optimize. My first job out of college was in a call center for Forrester Research. And I would sit and answer the phone and emails all day with people who couldn't log in, or they couldn't find the article that they're looking for, or they had questions about their account. And the CEO of Forrester used to call the customer support line, usually once or twice a month, and pretend to be a customer.
That's great.
To see what it was like. And everybody in the call center would just, first they'd be nervous that he was calling and is it him this time? But I thought it was just so cool. I was like, oh, what a great idea. In the book, there's an example, and it's not a CEO example, but it's a leader example. Major retailer in the US, they get on with the digital team once a month, and they try to do something on the website. Like, for example, this leader was replacing doorknobs in his second floor of his home, and he wanted to use the same ones that were on his first floor, which he purchased at the store, at the retailer for which he works. And the team got to watch him try to find the matching doorknobs on the website and see, where he was confused and where he stumbled. And it also shows, you take yourself so seriously, right? Like, let me get in there and see, what is this like? And yeah, maybe I don't know all the answers, or I don't know the ins and outs of the website. And the team uses it as more of a learning opportunity to see where they could be better.
That's a great example. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking of, for anyone who's ever designed an experience, how I'm assuming like mortified that team was at the end of that session, because that never goes well. And it just, it just proves what you and Andy have been saying. You're not your customer, and, you think you're designing the perfect experience, but it can't be perfect for everyone. And in fact, it's not perfect for most people, because everyone's an individual, right?
Yes.
That's right. And I think it's hard for folks that are in roles where you summarize that. So think of things like customer service professionals, customer success managers, product managers who try to speak on behalf of customers. Mm-hmm. I think that can be kind of lost in translation. The dev team's like, oh, here's Andy, the product manager, and he's telling us this is what customers want. He's telling us this is what customers need. That's different than seeing and hearing and feeling what customers experience when they have those needs. And so, for me, being a product manager earlier in my career, I think this was something that was really missing from our tool set of being able to go collect. We'd spend all this time collecting all these customer needs And then it would end up sort of going through the filter of the individual product manager. And I think it's hard to, number one, represent all those views the right way. And two, to really convey the empathy that comes from that to the rest of the organization. It ends up being like, oh, Andy, the product management lead, again, is telling us customers want whatever, but that's just what Andy wants us to go do. It's different than, yeah, we watched a highlight reel. There were 15 customers and like they all ran into the same problem. We should go fix that. And so I think that's part of it as well, is just sort of knocking down those filters and barriers between an organization and their customers. And in a weird way, digital's kind of been a bit of a disintermediary with a lot of people that build experiences and the people that consume them. It used to be so different. Imagine, when you worked at a bank 40 years ago, customers came in every day and talked to you. And now the people building the banking experience don't deal with customers. So I think this idea of like reconnecting everybody, I think just, gets to the fact that people do want to create great experiences. If they could just, see what those experiences are like through other folks' eyes, I think that would go a long way towards making better outcomes.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank you for all your practical advice, and just tell our listeners again, the book is fantastic. It has a lot of, I found, very practical and actionable advice and lots of great examples. We usually wrap up this podcast asking, do you have a book or podcast or TV recommendation? But certainly, I know what you might say is your first choice. I'm curious, is there anything else you're reading or watching that is influencing your day-to-day or how you view customer experiences?
The one book that I'm sort of heads down into right now, it's called The Human Element by David Schoenthal. And it talks about these 4 sort of forces that are at play in any sort of situation or scenario. And it addresses sort of the sort of squishiness of human perception and behavior, but in a way where it tees up a nice framework for how to navigate it. So I'd recommend that book to listeners.
That's great. Andy, anything from you?
I agree. David's book is fantastic. The only thing I would add is just, I think Janelle and I try to go out of our way to thank our customers that helped us put over 30 case studies in the book, and really sort of, much like our book talks about seeing the world through your customers' eyes, we sort of wanted to tell the story from our customers' perspectives as well. So always when I have an opportunity, Janelle and I like to thank the customers that helped us, put and illuminate their stories in the book. And so we really appreciate that.
That's great. Well, Andy, Janelle, thank you again so much for talking to us today. Appreciate your time, and we'll point everyone to that book as well as your recommendations in the show notes. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. We really had a good time.
Thanks so much, Kim.
Now it's time for our namesake segment, What If, So What, and most importantly, Now What? Jim, I thought Janelle and Andy brought up some great points around what I'll call performative customer centricity, you know what I mean, and how to really get to know your customer. What were some of your big takeaways?
Well, Kim, I'm glad you brought up performative customer centricity. It's something we talk about a lot. I think we've talked about kind of doing anything you can to make progress. And I think that's why some of these performative things, sometimes we call them best practices, right? They just sort of seep in to the organizations. And I know we've talked about this before, but kind of a great analogy or meme that comes from the agile world called cargo cult. And I'll just share it here in case folks haven't heard it, but I love this. It really kind of gets the idea across. So the cargo cult meme is actually taken from historical events during World War II in the South Pacific, when indigenous people were introduced to modern technology, airplanes, as airfields were built on their remote islands and used as supply depots. And so they've never seen that type of technology before. Airplanes were coming down, they're taking off, they're dropping off and picking up cargo throughout the war for years. And all of a sudden the war's over and they disappear. And so the islanders built these faux airplanes out of sort of Gilligan's Island style, right? Out of materials on the island. And they perform these rituals expecting or hoping that, the airplanes would come back from the sky. And it's absurd, as to, it's not that, people are doing absurd things to make their CX better, but, it does require the consideration, right? And I think that's your point. So I love that you opened there. I think when teams go through these rituals, again, they're well intended, but they're It's really about how we focus on real understanding, which really kind of led me to a couple of reactions from your interview. And one is how is any of this relevant to digital, or why is it particularly relevant to digital? And, Andy mentioned tracking people. That's kind of a time-honored tradition in digital experience, right?
Right.
Let's track them and see what they do. And then we'll infer why they were doing it or what they meant.
Right.
And I think what they're flipping here is the idea to get their input up front, which is sort of obvious in a lot of senses, but it's easy to track in a lot of ways. Let's tag it, see what happens. We'll figure it out later. I love the idea of sort of flipping that and creating empathy up front. To your bigger point about being performative, everyone kind of knows that CX is valuable. People know there are a lot of things that they know they should do. And I'm actually reminded of Neil Hoyn's interview. Neil Hoyn from Google, we talked about the gym membership dilemma, that you just do things. I joined a gym membership and then kind of forgetting that you have to actually go to the gym,
Right.
to get the benefits. So I think a lot of people know what they need to do, or they know what's a good idea. I want to be mobile. I want to set up a commerce site. I should do some journey mapping. I should have some analytics. I guess I should do some research and user testing. Again, they raise the salient points that get this idea in the door. I think they have an amazing way of doing it. And I just, certainly very experienced. I think they've probably seen every nuance, but I think just the awareness and how you focus it was a big takeaway for me. But how about you, Kim? What'd you hear?
Yeah, I love talking with Janelle and Andy because, this kind of represents one of my bigger areas of interest and background and just customer research and really making it matter in the organization. In fact, I think, the what if, so what, now what idea that we ended up coming up with here for the podcast is kind of rooted in some of these ideas. Is you could do anything, but what does that mean to the organization? And I think they just illustrated to me this fundamental need of understanding customers, and their expectations are still fundamentally challenging for organizations. Like you said, Everyone knows emotionally that they need to do it, but they don't understand how to do it and really make it count. I really liked Janelle's comment that research is an intimidating word. I think we've talked about it almost like those white noise words,
Right.
What is digital? What is innovation? Those kinds of things. Strategy, these things are intimidating. And I agree. I mean, she really opened my eyes to say, you're right, research can be intimidating because no one really knows what it takes and what they're getting out of it. And like you said, this notion of opt-in, the idea of explicitly and overtly asking customers for feedback shouldn't be that groundbreaking. But a single voice shouldn't become the truth. So
Right.
that kind of recency bias and confirmation bias, or what we'll call the boss's spouse bias, that becomes the truth in the organization. I think that is a big problem that we see all the time, which then all of these things result in what I'm calling performative customer centricity, meaning, all these activities happen, but nothing comes out of it. No real change comes out of it. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think there were so many different ways to take it. But Jim, what was your what if here?
Well, Kim, one of the things I thought of is the idea of research and testing. It's all a what if on its own, right? But that's a little absurd and maybe a little too abstract. But I was thinking about sort of the business value and the business case for this, trying to kind of jump ahead to your so what in a way. But I did a little research and I found, it's a little dated, but I found that a 1-point increase in a Yelp review, and I use Yelp all the time. I'm a prolific Yelp reviewer. So
I think most consumers use reviews, use Yelp. Yes, it's a good reference point.
Really good or really bad. There are no in-between reviews.
Right.
So I found that a 1-point increase in a Yelp review and the average score correlates to a 5 to 9 point revenue increase. So 5 to almost 10% increase.
Wow.
It's a little dated, but I think there's a lot of truth there. I think it tells us if you were rated poorly, imagine you're launching a product, imagine you're launching a business or a line of business. You don't want to wait until the review's coming in. But if you are rated poorly, it's a form of feedback. It's a form of testing. It's an invitation in a way to opt in on what to improve. And then you make those improvements. They show that they paid off. So, the service was too slow or the food was too cold, whatever. So why not do everything before it's too late? Before you spend the money, before the reviews go bad, before your app store rating is too low. My what if is, what if you could raise your review scores before you even launched? Of course, I'm going to get right into the reality check ahead of time because I know you're going to beat this one up. But, why not do everything you can? Well, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
You can't know everything, and time is of the essence. You eventually have to launch. So what, Kim? What if you could raise your review scores before you launched?
I actually really like that what if, because it gives us an opportunity to dispel some myths around customer research. And we'll come up with another word for that, but getting to know your customer, getting to know your review score before you go live. Let's put it that way. I'm still confronted pretty frequently over, like you said, it's too expensive. It takes too long. How do we know who to talk to? How do we know what to do with the results? And once we get the results, how do we prioritize them and get them into production? And I think the reality is, maybe it goes back to this notion of research is intimidating. None of that is true anymore. Not a single one of those points is true or should be a barrier. My so what is really looking at a modern customer insights program and turning those myths on their head a little bit. So if you really want to take this notion of customer insights and customer centricity and build a modern program, I think, and this is going to make it sound easier than it is, I understand that, but I like Janelle's take on this. It needs to be approachable. So maybe calling it something other than research as a good starting point, making it accessible. And we talk a lot about democratization of different, pieces of information or different efforts in an organization. But I think accessibility is the right word for that operation. It shouldn't just be a customer insights team. I loved how she talked about this fishbowl where people were just sitting around watching what customers did. Now, I know she had some critiques on it, but the fact that anybody could wander into that fishbowl and sit down and observe a customer, I think that just makes it accessible. And then actionable. I really liked her point around, and this relates to prioritization, looking at things that make a difference. I've been a part of previous organizations where they put a lot of time and effort into, let's say, redesigning this page or redesigning that experience. And when I'm asking, why are you doing that? There was just, in some cases, a lack of response. It was just sort of to keep the teams busy. Not even a notion of what is the benchmark data and why would we even put resources to this? And I know that sounds, back to your first example, absurd, but I've seen it too many times to think it was, an exception. A couple more so what's, can teams be educated and accept that they have their own biases that they bring to customer insights? So that kind of ties it back to actionable. This kind of combats the, what do we do with it? Whose voice matters most? This is a big cultural fight, and I think it's against human nature to think that you're not so unique. But the reality is there's probably 20 biases that we deal with in research projects that we actively fight against. Anything from how you phrase the questions to how you frame up the results to even how you, and I'm going to say this out loud, allow, different types of observers, because you don't want not who you allow, but making sure that if they're coming to one session, they're coming to 5. So that they don't walk away from one session thinking, well, that was the answer. And they like what they heard because it conforms to what they already thought or what their spouse thinks or whatever, or that's the only one they ever hear. So, to them, that's the truth. The other so what here in terms of accessible and actionable, and this came up certainly in our conversation with Janelle and Andy, is quantitative information. And Jim, you and I talk about this, I think, very frequently. You can make it say anything you want. Numbers can be spun a million different ways. And that's because it's missing the context. When you are putting together this program and you're thinking about, your premise of how do you get that 5-star review before you even launch, you really need to have a mix of both quantitative and qualitative data. You can't just look at the numbers, and you can't just look at, a customer getting frustrated with an experience. You have to correlate the two and then come up with your hypotheses and really test. And that's going to help you, I think, answer that big question, that get to the so what. What problems should we be solving? Where should we be spending all of our efforts when it comes to getting to know the customer better and solving their friction points? There's lots of different ways to do this. in terms of asking what problems should we be solving. I know both of us really like the jobs to be done methodology, but that's way up at the top of the funnel.
Right.
But perhaps that's really where some customers or some, brands should be starting. But if that's the so what, to me, you have to build that modern program, and there are different ways you can start thinking about building that modern program. But if that's the so what, what's the now what?
Well, that was about 10 so what's, Kim.
I know.
So
I told you I had a lot to say here.
I know, and I know you're passionate about this, and I agree with you. I just love the idea. It's really putting feedback into the system, even at jobs to be done. We've done research well in advance of a product or a prototype,
right?
That is really just focusing on what matters. Hey, we think this is what you do all day. Is this really what you do all day?
Exactly.
And then, yes, it's what I do all day, but doesn't really matter.
Right.
And I was kind of going back, Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week. These are the 4 hours that matter. Which ones are they? So, Kim, I think the now what here is something they gave us. They said that teams typically look at an existing experience because it's actionable. It's something they can react to right away. They can do it. They can do something today. And it makes us feel good. It's performative, right? It's
right.
There's a little dopamine rush, kind of like, scrolling through a social feed.
Right.
And it's something I can do, and it may not actually be valuable. And so I think, this is almost advice or now what's we've given on other episodes, which is start very small in one place and find out where it's critical to get the feedback, where you have to make a hypothesis or a guess around what's important. And I think people do try to do that, but actionability should not be the number one reason.
Right.
But it makes me think of a bigger picture. I want to go back to something I love, which are sort of 90s Six Sigma concepts. So,
right.
And some people are into 80s vinyl. I'm into 90s Six Sigma. So that's the cost of. And actually, this goes way before that. This is probably well in advance of Six Sigma, but the cost of quality formula. And when you think about the quality of anything you do, there's really 4 costs. There's the cost of prevention, the cost of appraisal, there's the cost of internal and then external failure. So what does that mean? Prevention. Prevention is research. Prevention is mistake proofing. There's a Japanese word for that called poka-yoke. And usability is so this is how we avoid the mistakes and the problems in the first place. It doesn't even have a problem. How do we just prevent it from happening? Well, you have to, again, find out, and this is the hardest one because you have to sort of make good guesses. Appraisal is another word for testing or experimenting. So how do we, once we have something, does it work? Does it meet the hypothesis? And that's all upfront costs. That is the cost that people look at. Those are both the costs that people take out of their project.
Yes,
because
exactly.
They'd rather no, we don't need any of this. We actually just need more product. Well, what if it's the wrong product or not, or nobody wants it? Well, it doesn't matter. We don't have time for prevention and appraisal. And we run into that dilemma a lot. But you have to face the failure costs. So things go poorly. There's rework. There are fixes. Things can be very expensive to maintain. And if you're really in trouble, if your Yelp scores are going down, it's lost business. Loyalty's down, App Store ratings are down. I love that model because it's about kind of helping you to frame up how you find the right point. But back to the term research and is it intimidating? There's a term that I hear a lot more of, and I don't think it's new, but I think it's sort of making its way in these circles, and that is experimentation. I like that term a little better than research. And what I like about it is it's continuous. You sort of form a hypothesis, you run an experiment, which is a test, and you form a new hypothesis based on the results. And I know that's deep in a lot of analytics circles and kind of runtime conversion optimization, but it's kind of adapting that to a product cycle or, I think, and a design cycle, I think is really important. So maybe we just, swap out a word and that'll fix it. But I think the real issue is an older concept called signal to noise. So it's good to know what's working and what's not working, but part of your experimentation is finding out what matters and what doesn't. We just had this conversation about another topic. Well, lots of data, but which data points, which variables matter? That's going to be the hardest thing to do. So, pause on being performative and make a good decision, about what's going to matter.
Yeah, I actually really like that. I like renaming research or reframing research to experimentation. I think that it hits
bigger.
Those 3 points I talked about. Yeah, making it approachable, making it accessible, making it actionable. And it also helps dispel some of the myths I was talking about. It takes too long. It's too expensive. There's a way to really embrace experimentation, to make it quick, to make it cheap, and to garner a lot of valuable insights. Not just quantitative. I mean, think about showing something as simple as a hallway test in terms of research methodology. You show, prototype on a piece of paper to 5 people. That's an experiment.
Yeah.
It's cheap and easy. It's immediately actionable. We could talk more around why 5 is enough. Maybe that's a different episode. But I really like that. Maybe we should get Janelle and Andy back on and test our research to experimentation terminology. See what they think.
Yeah, if there's another word for you will thank yourself later, maybe that's the word we're looking for. So maybe somebody can email us even better word. So
yes, always looking for suggestions. Well, thanks, Jim, for your thoughts.
Thanks, Kim.
And thanks again to Janelle and Andy for their insights. Check out their book. It's available now. It's called User Tested. Thanks to everyone for listening today. Please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And until next time, keep asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what?
You've been listening to What If, So What, the digital strategy podcast from Perficient with Jim Hertzfeld and Kim Chopek. We want to thank our Perficient colleague, JD Norman, for our music today. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at perficient.com. Thanks for listening.